the teacher. And not only that, something has changed in the school itself. It's all so silent. The teacher was wearing his best dress, his Sunday best. Already it looked and felt like a Sunday, and the teacher was wearing his best clothes. He usually wears his Sunday's best when there is an occasion, a special occasion in the school. But the thing that surprised me most was to see on the back benches that were always empty, the village people sitting quietly like ourselves. What really put him into a little more confusion than what he was already experiencing is the fact that there were other people sitting inside this classroom. Now, as you go on through the lesson, you'll find out that it is a one room school, meaning that was one classroom, and all the students of all the classes had their lessons there, and there was only one teacher. He was taking turns teaching all the lessons to the different groups of students. And in the back benches, which were usually empty, the whole school was one room, and even then, the last benches were almost always empty, and there was people sitting there, surprisingly. The village people sitting there quietly, like ourselves, they too seemed to be quiet, unusually. Probably they usually gossiped a lot. Not this time. Old Hauser with his three-cornered hat reminds me of scenes of um, Pirates of the Caribbean, where you have Captain Sparrow or some of those military naval officers wearing such hats. Or I don't know where exactly I've seen those kind of hats. Three corners only, three pointed corners, and that's supposed to be formal. Old Hauser was in his three-cornered hat. So the speciality of Mr. Hauser was he was looking very formal. The former mayor may be another character, I guess. The former postmaster, and look at that second time, former, and several others besides, maybe former, some other people from the government, former employees of the government. They were all sitting there and they were listening to the class. Because everybody looked sad. They were not really um, very attentively hearing something or listening to something. Rather, they were very serious. They seemed to be in a very somber mood. And Hauser had brought an old primer. Now, this special man with a three-cornered hat had brought an old primer. Now, what is referred to here as primer is a book that is used during as the kind of let's say textbook at the most primary level. Maybe it had an A and a B and a C if it is English, but it was not English, it was French. It was a French equivalent. Alphabets, a book with alphabets, thumbed at the edges. Thumbed at the edges meaning when you use a book a lot and it becomes pretty old in your hands, you'll find that the tips of the um, pages curl inward or outward as the case may be. In fact, the book that I have in front of me is also curled at the edges. Maybe that's what he's referring to, thumbed at the edges. And he held it open on his knee, just placed it on his lap. Right? That's the meaning of he held it open on his knee. Now, he held it open. That means he was doing an action. He was making sure that the book was lying open on his lap. How did he make sure? With his great spectacles lying across the pages. He's taken his great spectacles off and he has placed it on the book to ensure that the pages don't fly. While I was wondering about it all, M. Hamel mounted his chair, the man who was walking up and down till now, with his great iron ruler under his arm. He mounted his chair. What I feel is, when that is mentioned in that particular way, that probably there was a small kind of platform on which the teacher's table and the chair rested. And he climbed on top of that platform and sat on his chair. And in the same grave voice, he had talked to him in a very serious voice, in the same grave voice and gentle tone which he had used to me, said, "My children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. The order has come from Berlin, and that is the order on the bulletin, to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine." Alsace, Lorraine probably are two districts in the border of France, the border that is quite close to Germany and those areas that were Prussia at one time. Prussia used to be a huge empire which consisted of Germany and Poland and one or two other places. And now these two border districts of France, Alsace and Lorraine, have been captured. They were called Alsace-Lorraine, Alsace-Lorraine. Now there's an order here, no more French, only German. So the medium of instruction is going to be German. The language that is to be taught is German. And in those days, if there was anything taught at school, the most important thing that they taught at school was language. Now the issue of language is quite an important thing. Most peoples, wherever you go, give great importance to language. If you go to some place and you don't know the language of that place, whatever way you are similar to that group of people, you cannot really get close to them. I've felt that in my life too. Even here, in the place where I teach, if I speak all the time in English, which is not my mother tongue, chances are I'll never really get close to people of the state in which I teach, because the state has got its own language, and since I don't speak that language, the degree to which I get accepted among this crowd is certainly lesser than if I had learned the language and I speak the language the same way that they do speak it. So when you remove the language, you remove an identity. That is something that people generally identify themselves with, language. And if you really look deeply into it, language is associated with culture. Look deeply into culture, it is associated with religion. The more you look deeply into the influence of language, you'll find that it is all pervasive. It is through that the culture of a place is established, is preserved, is continued. So it's very important to learn the language of a place. Now the language of that place is being replaced by a language that we are not very familiar with.